After 30 years of working as a media composer, so writing music for film, TV, and some computer games, it's only very recently that I asked the question, why do we write music to picture? Why do we as an audience expect our box sets and documentaries and moving pictures, up on a big screen or on our phones, TikToks, YouTubes, computer games? Why do we expect them to be underscored? And why do we underscore everything? What would we lose if that underscore, that music, wasn't there? My first revelation came when doing a video in this tunnel for this YouTube channel. It's the Innocent Railway, which runs underneath Holyrood Park. And I was just really surprised at how underwhelming they were on a screen. Was it just because it was in 2 dimensions? Did I use the wrong lens, the wrong saturation or white balance? Or indeed, is it the lack of the peripheral nature of being in a place, or just the sense of dankness, the smell of the old Victorian abandoned railway tunnel? And then it dawned on me, that's why we need music. So is that it? Is that our role, to add a 3rd dimension to a 2-dimensional image? In researching this film, I would like to argue that us film composers do add that 3rd dimension, but not just to the picture, along a number of different cognitive fields, and that we can deliver something beyond the picture, but also beyond just sound. In this video, part of the Origins series, where I go back and fill in the huge gaps in my self-taught education, I want to find out why it is we feel we need to add music to picture, and show you how, in this day and age, I do it. How you yourself can have a go and experience for yourself the massive impact that music, any music, can have on picture, any picture. At Crow Hill, we provide people with the opportunity of trying these things out for themselves, or indeed, if you're considering seriously a career in writing music for picture, the opportunity to hone your craft, to practice and to make mistakes without it having any negative impact on that career. Right, before I drag this in, what we're doing is a bit of telly, and telly starts at 10 hours. I've done a video about this, linked in the video description down below. So that is our SMPTE, Society of Motion Picture Television Engineers. Basically, that's our time code setting. That's where we want the movie to start. And then I'm just going to drag that movie in directly from my Finder. And this will vary for different DAWs, but this is how I do it on Logic. I'm then just going to go to Movie Project Settings and set the start time to 10. This soundtrack is basically the guide audio, which is in stereo, but we've also created the stems, which are going to be important. So let's just grab all of those, create new tracks, automatically labels everything correctly. Let's get rid of that instrument there. Now, this is likely to be basically a sum of these different stems, so I'm going to mute that for the time being, and let's just have a little check at what is going on here. So, just made the waveforms nice and big. So, we've got my microphone. This is a MIDI. So, this is the RE20 mic that we've got going on here, and then we've got my location mic. A bunch of ruthless rivals had got together. And then we've got the underscore, the temp score, temporary score. And then we've got some more. More score under there. And some sound effects there. This is just, let's make that bigger for you so you can see what's going on. Thing thing that is so good about practicing on factual entertainment is the realization of how less is more. So what I'm going to do is mute the temp. This is a MIDI cable, otherwise known as a 5-pin DIN. Well, that's the connector at the end. The more you do this, the more you get a sense immediately from watching something of the cadence, the tempo of the piece. And I'm hearing something at this speed. This is a MIDI cable, otherwise known as a 5-pin DIN. Well, that's the connector at the end. But specifically, this is a MIDI cable because inside is a dirty little secret that tells the story of how MIDI came to be. The secret is... So you'll see that I'm hitting the cuts, and that's just from instinct of the cadence that I'm speaking at, and the way it's been edited. So I think maybe 110 feels a little bit slow. 109. This is a MIDI cable, otherwise known as a 5-pin DIN. Well, that's the connector at the end. And it feels just a tad slow to me. My foot was tapping slightly faster than that click. So I'm going to go for 110. Just going to pull up the software instrument track. Baseline. And then we'll just create a double time with the delay. Listen back with the contributor speaking and mix it in. This is a MIDI cable, otherwise known as a 5-pin DIN. Well, that's the connector at the end. But specifically, this is a MIDI cable because inside is a dirty little secret that tells the story of how MIDI came to be. The secret is a quirk of history, tells part of a tale where the spark of inspiration, creation and innovation meets that of simple business frugality.
And for me, this secret gives a sense that there was a bit of hedge betting going on there, that the success of this enterprise was...
So it's a good little sketch there. So the first question I asked before delving into these books was specifically where film music is concerned. Were silent films ever actually silent? Turns out yes and no. There are 3 or 4 schools of a scholastic argument where the question of music and silent film is concerned. But something that is, it seems, tacitly agreed was there never is report of there being a decision to add music or accompany moving images with music. It just was from the very first public performance, and there'll be arguments that maybe there were performances of moving picture type things before this, but the Lumiere brothers in 1908, December the 28th, is commonly agreed to be the first public exhibition of moving picture, and it is reported that there was music accompanying it. The first theory, or hypothesis rather, is that musical accompaniment was a convenient way of masking or muting out the sound of the projector, which would have been in the same room as the audience back then. And projectors were particularly noisy when they first came about. A lot of these moving pictures were exhibited in places not designed for that purpose. At fairs, things would have been noisy outside the projection area, but also audiences of the time didn't have the respect they have these days. They were somewhat more talkative, rowdy even, and I imagine a bit more pissed. Another theory about why music always seems to have accompanied silent movies was that it would have been a new phenomenon and it was there to have a de-haunting effect. The idea of these faces on a screen moving. And the concern was that whilst there was a lot of interest in witnessing one of these moving pictures, would these people return to an unnerving or haunting experience? There are those who quite simply think, well, it's entertainment. And when people are having a night out, particularly back in those days, the prime source of entertainment in one's home was music. It was just expected. It would have been missed if it wasn't there. But my favourite theory about the need for music to film, even in this early silent age, is by Kurt London, who's written a whole bunch on silent movies. And his hypothesis was, and I quote, "It was the task of the musical accompaniment to give it auditory accentuation and profundity." He's my favourite theory. It makes us sound more important. It gives us a purpose beyond just being a sonic odorator for a noisy room. So what I want to do now is just correct the tempo. For me, the most important sync there is to hit the origins. I think by increasing this, we'll hit that cut. Works for me. So we've got like first subject, second subject, just a kind of a slight, making it kind of go up a notch. I think here we need something to give a sense of building. So I'm going to go. I want to find out why there's only 8 types of MIDI message, 16 channels, and everything is counted from 0 to 127. It seems very arbitrary. Thing about reverb, separates it from the dialogue, puts it into a place that separates it. We're going to take this right back. Let's put the dialogue back in. Dialogue is master. Has become the central nervous system of everything we do today in music, and we still very much use it, whether it be via one of these cables from one keyboard to your door. I want to find out why there's only 8 types of MIDI message, 16 channels, and everything is counted from 0 to 127. It seems very arbitrary. I want to uncover the dirty little secret at the core of this cable and connector. The universal synthesizer, and everything is counted from 0 to 127. It seems very arbitrary. I want to uncover the dirty little secret at the core of this cable and connector. So just little sketch there. I would finesse that out, probably change the voicing in this lower part here, make this a proper end. But it doesn't need any more than that. That's sitting under, it's motoring very nicely, and you can just have so much fun, maybe going from 16ths to 8ths. The fact that it is repetitive actually increases the sense of expectation. If I would change it too much during this exposition, you would get distracted by this, like I'm changing the subject. But it's no, I'm completely obsessed with MIDI cables, and I really want to find out what this is all about. That comes from the repetition, not, I guess, really from what the composition is saying. It's the fact that the composition is being so insistent. December the 28th, the evening of 1895 in Paris. They showed a series of short films, and within a year, it was ripping the arse out of London audiences. Probably not surprising because of its proximity to Paris, but also London had just an insane number of variety playhouses, music halls, theatres, concert venues. With music halls, which became picture houses, you had a pit, and in that pit would sit an orchestra, and in front of that orchestra would be a musical director, the master and commander of the musical output of that venue. The way that these musical directors went about accompanying these movies live with their bands and repertoire and popular songs of the day left a lot to be desired. It was quite common apparently in London, in these various different picture houses that were springing up, that the pit band, a bit bored, third, fourth, fifth performance of the day, would just clatter through any old repertoire, and once they got to the end of their books, would get up and leave, with the audience just sitting there in silence. A lot of the producers and directors are reported to have really hated this approach to their moving picture. Fortunately, at the time in Paris, music was kicking off. Very probably had something to do with absinthe. The Lumiere brothers managed to engage none other than Camille Saint-Saëns. He's famous for Carnival des Animaux, and anecdotally, a bit of a party animal. And there was an ongoing willingness for many composers of great esteem to work in this new art form. Shostakovich banged out a number of very successful film scores. Hollywood courted Igor Stravinsky for many years. Did you know that this track by Prokofiev is actually a cue from one of his film scores for a film called Lieutenant Kij? And there was also this kind of proto-Williams-Spielberg bromance between Sergei Eisenstein and the composer that he worked with, Edmund Meisel. And they set a fine example of early film music with their seminal masterpiece, Battleship Potemkin. The problem with the commissioned score was it just wasn't scalable. Film was all about reproduction. It's the reason why that small chap from Kennington became the most famous and recognizable human being ever to have lived on the planet. Now, what I would probably do is introduce, and this is the jobbing hack in me, for this section here, I would probably introduce something more abstract, and then what I would do when we came here, you've already familiarized your audience with this theme. So what I would do, let's just drag it back to there, is I would simply do that. The year is 1983. Okay, that's the cue for me. The year is 1983. Maneater was #1 in the Billboard charts with Hall & and maybe just a little bit. Let's create a different tempo there. The year is 1983. Maneater was #1 in the Billboard charts with Hall & Oates, Down Under by Men at Work in the UK, E.T. was calling home, Rambo went on his first killing spree, and Dustin Hoffman was unclipping his padded bra after a successful blockbuster run as the character Tootsie. So it was a year after the Saint-Saëns commission that the Edison Company started issuing instructions, 1909, that went along with their films with suggestions of musical accompaniment. And this seemed to work better as a better compromise between the exhibitors and the filmmakers. And by 1913, this had become a whole kind of sub-industry of its own, music catalogues, publications of musical pieces that were curated, collated, and catalogued according to mood and possible scenes that you needed to underscore. The most famous of which was a German publication called Kinothetik. And over in the States, in New York, there was this guy called Max Winkler who was having one of those, crises born of success. He was curating these music catalogues and distributing notation amongst the many pit bands of the New York picture house scene. He had a phenomenally encyclopedic knowledge of the catalogue or heritage of music, but reportedly said, there's an infinite number of scenes and outcomes within a movie to be accompanied by an infinite number of pieces of music. So something he suggested as a solution to this was to get the exhibitors to play the films to him in advance so he could specially curate a bespoke or tailor-made catalogue of music for that particular exhibition, film, or series of short films. And he called these things cue sheets, and they took off massively, so much so he couldn't keep up with that and had to resort to outright copyright theft in order to furnish this furnace of desire for music with relevant pieces. And his business became a runaway success, but it wasn't for long because talkies came along. Silent movies were unsilenced, and several years later he was reported to have sold his entire catalogue for $250, a catalogue that amounted to 70 tons of music, sheet music, paper. But something I picked up in one of these books that I thought really interesting, musical directors who could really massage music to fit the picture were very much in demand. And there was this one particular bloke, David Raskin, who was considered to be one of the finest. But something that he could never figure out was sudden changes in pre-written music would be really distracting for the audience because it wouldn't match a change in emotion on screen, and vice versa. Things could change very suddenly on screen and that just wouldn't be reflected in the music as you'd expect it to be. So something that he said you could never get from these catalogues was transitions, and he decided to start composing transitions of his own to get masterfully from one piece of music to another. And I think if there's any demonstration of where using preordained, pre-recorded music as opposed to commissioned music to picture is concerned, it is this shaping. Okay, so I'm pretending that I'm happy with those results, and what I'm now going to do, and again, this is door specific, so don't know how this works on other doors, but I believe most doors offer the option of being able to bounce or burn the audio into a movie. So export audio to movie is what I'm going to do. Let's make it 24-bit. Let's spoil them. Always check it back. This is a MIDI cable. And I'm checking it back on my laptop.
Wait a minute. You ain't heard nothing yet. Wait a minute, I tell you. You ain't heard nothing. You want to hear Toot Toot Tootsie? All right, hold on. Lou, listen. Play Toot Toot Tootsie. 3 choruses, you understand? And the 3rd chorus, I whistle. Now give it to him hard and heavy. Go right ahead.
The words of Al Jolson, immortalised in the 1927 film Jazz Singer, at 17 minutes 25 seconds. Everything changed from that point. You can argue whether it was the first synchronized dialogue on film, the first sound heard on film. It wasn't. Maybe it's just the first feature film to feature synchronized dialogue. There wasn't much of it on the jazz scene. It was kind of a mixture. Warner's had bought this new technology called Vitaphone. People had been attempting to print audio to the film stock, but the quality was really, really terrible. They hadn't got there yet. And quite a lot of investment into the technology of phonographs, particularly by Bell Laboratories, had been done, where the sound quality and the amplification available seemed to work quite well. The difficulty was this synchronization, and in this early technology, it was decided it was all about the synchronization, or the using of common motors, or motors operating at a very fixed RPM. Now, reels of film held up to 11 minutes of action, whereas these platters that were made out of shellac by this point, not vinyl, could only contain, running at 78 RPM, as records did back in those days, 3 or 4 minutes of music. So in order to maintain synchronization so that they could switch between projectors on these two technologies, by increasing the size of a record to 16 inches, by having the thread start in the center and move out, and having it run at 33.5 RPM would get you 11 minutes of sound out of a long player, a very long player. It sounds very complicated and fiddly. It didn't catch on, but the jazz singer used this technology. The other thing that had to be standardized was the frame rate. Up to this point, frame rates are between 60, 20, 24 frames a second, which is why flicks were called flicks, because, at 16 frames per second, you can actually see the kind of black of the shutter of the projector. And it's why we see silent movies, they run them too quickly for us, because otherwise they would flicker and they'd be annoying for the eye, which is why they look all kind of jerky and sped up. Anyway, they went for 24 frames per second because the motion blur that you get with 24 frames a second is the closest motion blur that you get in these acoustic eyeballs. Film suddenly became less kinetic. All of these elaborate camera moves, these boom shots, they ceased to exist in the early days of sound. And the reason for that was there was no such thing as overdubbing. Whatever was recorded to film or recorded to a lathe simultaneous to the film was what you got. So microphones, big old things, had to be obscured by flower arrangements and fruit bowls. But what's more, it was that the noise of the projectors themselves needed to be isolated. So they were shoved into these strange boxes, sealed boxes, which couldn't be moved. And so this very short period of ultra-realism occurred in talkies, where it was questioned whether music was required at all, if it would block out the amazing impact of the sound of a door being slammed off camera. All of these remarkable firsts. Any fears of the future of music's place in moving pictures was to be short-lived, because film entered its golden era and it went mental. We're talking a handful of studios here operating on these huge lots they built, churning out up to 500 films a year. The logistical effort that went into making these feature films, it just beggars belief, not least with the music. Entire buildings were built on these lots to house the music staff. Look at this schematic of an average music department at a major studio of the day. People knew that music was an integral part of the film-going experience. It was important. It needed that investment. And whilst all of those pit bands may have been put out at work, you had orchestras who weren't just booked for sessions. They were there, and certainly in the early days, when the film was being filmed, because if they wanted an orchestra to play a cue, they had to play it whilst the actors were acting out the scene. There was often complaints by these actors that they couldn't hear themselves think, because whilst they were performing to camera, there was a bloody great orchestra in the wings. Sound was invented before overdubbing. That was to come later. So musicians found themselves employed and playing morning, noon and night during this era. That, of course, was to change. So returning to this retired railway tunnel, the scene of this revelation of being profoundly underwhelmed by what picture alone can do. And researching this video has left me with a sense of hope for us in the future. I know so many of us are talking about the threat of AI. To be frank, we've got to try a little bit harder than the demonstration I've provided today. But what's so wonderful about analysing the reason we have music to accompany film is the sheer number of cognitive fields that we operate on, and how we can, as I said before, get through the screen, behind the scenes, into the heart of the story, the minds of the players, the Greek chorus, and really, I guess, be part of the spirit of this art form. An art form, for me, is just something that makes you feel. I think what I'm finding really useful about this Origin series is I'm not swatting up on too much theory or technical know-how, just getting that kind of emotional context and understanding of why it is we do what we do. And I think that's something that I'd really like to leave you with, particularly if you're going to try downloading the stuff that we've provided, you know, really boring factual entertainment stuff that you can practice scoring to. I think just to remember not to overanalyze what it is you're doing musically, theoretically, or technically, but just to ask yourself how it makes you feel. That is what separates us from the machines. And the more you can make yourself feel stuff, the more you'll make your audience feel stuff. The more you will help the author of the piece narrate it, comment on it, explain it, the more, as Kurt London said, and I'm going to misquote, the more you will accentuate the profundity.